Well, good morning, everybody. Good to see all of you guys. This is your first time here at Hill City. My name is John Wagler. I'm part of this team here. I'm grateful that you're spending a portion of your Sunday here. Again, as DeAndre said earlier, if you're one of our college students here, welcome back. I know everyone's been loading in this last week or two, and I'm just grateful you're part of our community. And on your way out today, stop by the info bar area. We've got some things for you as well. And just a reminder, discipleship is now open, and a lot of you guys have already signed up, and which is so encouraging. This is I feel like I make this announcement every time. This is not an indictment on men and whatsoever. You guys are just a little slower to sign up for discipleship. And so just as a reminder, men, this is also for you. And so we'd love to have some more men sign up. But the signups have been really great so far, and really excited for all that's going to transpire over the next several months together within discipleship. And we've been in this series, we were in a series all summer long called Wisdom, and then had a brief respite from that last week. And then we're going to kick off a new series today in the Gospel of John. But before we get into that, every single week we've been showing these videos. And sometimes they're at the start of the sermon, sometimes they're in the middle of the sermon, whatever. And I just have loved these so much because we're celebrating transformation and the power of God and what God can do in people or a person and what that ends up meaning for our community. And as we kind of approach our 10-year birthday and everything and celebrating all of this stuff, it's like these stories are such a wonderful glimpse into what's transpiring on a much larger level throughout our community. And so this is another just beautiful, powerful story of God's transformative work, and this is Marcio today, so you guys take a look.
Family was always felt like a predictable, safe place to be, and things start to take a little turn whenever my dad started to climb the corporate ladder. And because of that, he had to travel a lot. And around that season was when I started to feel very unprotected and things felt like super shaky in my life. And that was the first time that I experienced going to isolation, feeling so alone and many times not certain of what the future will bring, which in my own way started to develop in my life a sense of accomplishment, and I wanted to be the best that I could in anything that I would do. If it's sports, music, and anything that I would place my hands, I would start to shift my value towards what I can do and what I can achieve. It's almost like a way I was like trying to tell people, hey, I'm worth not leaving, please stay, please stay. Later on in life, I was in a very significant romantic relationship. The person decided to leave without in my opinion at that time, in my view at that time, with no heads up. I was completely blindsided. So that was a season in my life where I was completely depressed. I felt like despair, angered, unheard, unseen. And I once again turned back to isolation. And I made my whole life about climbing the corporate ladder and proving my value. Okay, life, if this is the card that I was dealt, I'm going to show everybody that I'm worth it and I can be successful. And it turns out that when you make success your idol, you might get that. But success came in my life at least with a price and with a weight. And the price of success for me was the years of abuse to my own soul, because now that you think you achieved, you have to keep it. And then you, like in that vicious cycle of, okay, achieve success, repeat it, prove to people they're wrong if they leave you, achieve success again, feeling like lost in the success that you achieved. Let's repeat all over again. Getting out of COVID, getting out back to normal, life was getting back to normal. So I Googled churches in Richmond. I wanted everything to do with God and nothing to do with people. So whenever I arrived at the church, it was an impact for me because it is such a place that values relationship. I remember having this conversation with Wags once. He asked me, Marcio, what's your story? And as always, I went to my comfortable place to tell everything that I have achieved. He graciously listened to me. He smiles at me and asks, "How does that make you feel?" And I was taken back a little bit by the question because nobody ever have reacted this way to my successes, Phil. It's almost like we're having this unspoken conversation when he says, "Marcio, I asked you about your story and you tell me about your achievements." And you would think that my answer would be, "Yeah, I feel great." But I actually replied back, "Wags, I'm tired. I am so tired." And then he smiles back and says, okay, this is our baseline. So this is where we start our relationship. We don't want anything from you. We just want to be part of your life and we want to love you well. Slowly but surely, the church started through community, healthy community. This church has showed me that my value is in God and not in what I achieve. I can tell that my priorities have shifted now. So instead of trying to build a kingdom for myself and prove everybody wrong, I'm just trying to build up the kingdom and love on people. Whenever I got to this place, I felt like God said to me, "Marcio, you cannot have me without having my people." So living a life now that is focused on serving others instead of so self-centered, trying to achieve my own glory, my own goals, it's been remarkable.
So good. I just love these stories every week. They're so awesome. We're in this series, starting this series today in the Gospel of John. How many of you guys have ever read anything in the Gospel of John? It's okay if you haven't, but all right, awesome. We're going to be in this series for a long time. I don't even know how long. It's like, it's going to be a really, really long time, and we'll pop in and out of things. I would be shocked if we finish this by the end of next year, honestly, and I really mean that. And so, but we're going to be in this for a while, and we're not going to go through every single verse, but we're probably going to come pretty close of just going through. And then again, we'll pop in and out of some other things along the way, but I just felt like we really needed to spend time in just the book, the Bible, for a while, and appreciate it. And in particular, where there's so much chaos all around us for so many different reasons, it's just like centering ourselves in everything. And I get it that sometimes we walk in, we're like, "I just need a quick pick me up. Can you just give me like a nice lesson?" or something like that. And I get all that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's like we need depth and we need an understanding and something that can help us through all the chaos that we see around us. And so we're just going to be in this Gospel of John and learn a lot about Jesus and what he taught and what he means. And this first kind of 14 verses that we're going to read here in just a second, it's like, do you ever do someone with your friends where you'd be like, "Hey, up top," and then when they go to reach their hand up, you punch them in the stomach? You ever do that? Or I had a friend, one of my roommates in college, one of my college teammates. His name was Boo. He would do this thing to us all the time, where he would rake the back of your neck with his nail and make you go like this, and then pull your chest hair so you couldn't do it. So anyway. This is what John kind of is in the beginning of what he does. He's stepping into something that's so significant, and he is, when you first read it and when you first hear it, you're going to be like, "Oh, I remember this part. I've heard this part about the Word, and yeah, that's Jesus." But if you miss what he's really doing, it's like, oh, you're missing the depth of what John is attacking in that moment. And so I want to give you first some nice to knows about John before we dive in. Number one, it was written about 80 to 100 AD. All right, so most people believe that John the disciple wrote the book of John, which it's probably true. Some people believe there's this guy named John the Elder who is also a follower of Jesus and a significant follower of Jesus in Jerusalem at that same time period, that it's possible he might have written it as well, but it's probably more than likely that John, the disciple of Jesus, wrote this book. The number 7 is a very significant number in the Bible. Number 7 is in completion. And there's a lot of 7s throughout the book of John. One is the book of signs. There's 7 significant signs, and we'll go through each one of those. But another thing that we'll see is that there are 7 titles There are 7 titles for Jesus here in this first chapter. Is it working, Bree? We got it? Is it not working? It's not working? Okay. We've got, the titles are Word, Light, Son of God, Messiah, the Lamb of God, the King of Israel, the Son of Man. So you see all these titles here in just the first chapter. The Word, the Light, the Son of God, the Messiah, the Lamb of God, the King of Israel, and the Son of Man. So these are like 7 titles. And then we have 7 themes that are also in this first chapter. So all these things are on purpose that John is doing. The 7 themes are life and light and darkness, witness, faith, glory, and truth. Life, light, darkness, witness, faith, glory, and truth. And so we see all these things on the front end. And so John is writing this, and he's doing it on purpose, having the number 7. So the number 7 becomes very significant. We have the primary audience that this was written to, which are Jewish Christians, all right? Which are Jewish Christians who were rejected by those around them. And what's fascinating is what John is going to speak into. And this is why it's so important, because we live in a world right now where some of these same questions and same statements that are being made about purpose of life and meaning of life and all this stuff is the same thing that was going on back then. And so you had Judaism back then as obviously one of the main religious beliefs, which they were people of the Torah. And the Torah was spoken through prophets. And in order to follow the Torah, all the followers of Judaism were responsible to follow the law. And that's what they found in the Torah. And so, which was wonderful. It's part of God's story in all of this. And then you had Greeks, right? You had Greeks. I'm oversimplifying all of this. But you had the Greek culture as well, where you had things like Stoicism, which was basically you looked at life around you and you're like, what really matters? Life just comes at me and I just got to deal with it and I kind of move on. And then you had this thing called Epicureanism, which was, hey, find whatever makes in your heart, like whatever makes you happy, you go and you just do that thing that just makes you happy, and that's where you start finding life. You had this belief system called pantheism, which was essentially saying that everything is God or everything is divine. And so you would say, oh, that tree is divine, or that chair you're sitting is divine, and which isn't true, right? Because in the Bible, there's a separation between Jesus, and there's a separation with God and Jesus between all of creation, and so it can't be those things like muddled together. And plus, if that were true, you could just go up to a tree and bow down and worship it. So it doesn't even make any sense. But that was a really prevalent thought within that time. We had something called Gnosticism, which was essentially saying your body doesn't actually matter, so you can do whatever you want with your body. It doesn't matter. It's really all about spirit. You had polytheism, of course, which is multiple gods. And then you had Plato and the way of his thinking around reasoning. I give you all of that in a very oversimplified form to just say, like, John is speaking into all of it. He isn't just simply like taking like little phrases because they sound good about Jesus. He is actually going into the cultural narrative that it's at play right now. So if you want to, like, this gospel speaks directly into so many of the things that we're seeing right now in our own culture, in the belief systems that we see. It's just different wording right now of what we're going through. And John is speaking directly into this repeatedly. The primary or the purpose of the book of John is also interesting, because he sometimes like, well, why did John write this book? And he actually says it in John chapter 20. He says this: Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. So meaning you can read through the entire book of John. It's like Jesus did way more than that, like way more than that. He says, but these are written so that you might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So John is like very clear why he writes all of this. And so it's like, man, to the listeners, like, man, I want you to know, if you want to find life, you find it in who? Good. You're going to say that a lot today, all right? You find it in who? Jesus. Yeah. And he wants it, he's like, that's why I'm writing this. I'm not writing this for any other reason. I'm not writing you to tell you about cool miracles that he did. I'm not writing you to be like, oh, these are all the people that followed him. I'm not writing you to say about anything else. I want you to believe in Jesus, and that Jesus is the hope of the world, and that Jesus is where you find life, and that Jesus actually is the Savior. It's pretty significant what he's doing. And he's like, man, you guys go through all these other belief systems, and you're talking about all these other gods and all these other idols that you have and all these other things, and your body doesn't matter. And he's like, but I'm telling you that it's all of this, if you want to find out what really matters and you want to find your real purpose in life and you want to find out the fullness of life, you find it in who? Jesus. Yes. So that leads us to our passage today. I know you can't even see it, but I want you to stand and listen. I want to see if I unplug this and plug it back in, if it makes a difference. Go ahead and stand. It says this. This is from John chapter 1. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. This is John the Baptist he's talking about. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Amen. You guys can have a seat. And so here's what I want us to really think about when it comes to this idea of Jesus and what John's really trying to get across right here off the top. Is this reality of power. Of power. Everyone say power. How many guys would like to have power? Yeah, it's like, if you've ever had even a little bit of power, it's kind of intoxicating, right? And you're like, ooh, I kind of like this power. But with Jesus, it's like, man, this is the ultimate power. It's the ultimate power. And John is speaking into this because, again, he's coming after all these cultural narratives. And he's like, hey, you guys are trying to find power and all in purpose and all these other things. He's like, I'm telling you that Jesus is the power, that it all centers on Jesus. And if you want answers to all the what's happening around you, if you want answers to the world that's happening around you, you have to go to the source and not the symptom. And so what John is doing is, so if he were alive today, John would write this letter and he would say, hey, you guys see racism around in your country. Okay, is that what the actual problem, or is that a symptom of a deeper heart problem? It's like, well, it's a symptom. It's a really big problem that needs to be dealt with, but it's a symptom of something else that's going on in people's hearts. And you have to go to the source. And how do you get to the source of everything? You want to talk about sexism. You want to talk about all the hate that we have in the political divide and all that. It's like, oh, no. It's like we can talk about a lot of these symptoms of the things, but it's like, it's why one law doesn't cure it. Because if it was that simple, then a law will cure it. Now, our law is important. Of course they are. Of course. But it's like it doesn't cure it. And you can't make people do a certain thing. Well, why not? Because you have to get to the source of everything. And so what John's doing here is he's like, hey, you guys are all trying to find purpose, and where is all this power coming from? And how does all this stuff matter? And he's like, I'm telling you, you have to go to the source of it all. Even when you look around at worldviews right now, you're asking questions like, who are we? Where are we? What's the problem? What's the solution? Where are we located in this story? That's how we all have these worldviews. And John's like, hey, let me just bring you back to make this as simple as possible. I want to bring you back to the Word. I want to bring you back to, and when I say Word, not just the spoken word, but the Word, capital W Word. And he's like, I want to bring you back to this idea of Jesus. And verses 1 through 4, he goes through all of this, and he keeps going through. And as he's talking, he's like, hey, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And sometimes, how many guys have heard that before, or read that before, right? Yeah. And the Word is who? Jesus, right? The Word is Jesus. That's who John is referring to. And it's just fascinating because we kind of hear that and we're like, oh, that's pretty cool, but why does any of that actually matter? Well, John is making this big, bold claim because the first thing he says is, in the beginning. Where have we heard that before? Yes. It's as if John is trying to make a statement. And what John is doing is he's like, hey, let me take you back to the beginning of it all. Let me take you back to the creative order. Let me take you back to when things were chaotic. Let me take you back to the beginning of the story. Hey, to my Jewish listeners, let me take you back to Genesis. Hey, to my Greek listeners, let me take you back to how you think creation happened with Zeus. Let me take you back to the beginning of it all because the Word was there. And they're like, well, who's the Word? And he's like, it's Jesus. See, this idea of the word was really interesting, even linguistically. The Hebrew word that it's attached to is this word called deber, and which meant to push forward. And how they use that word, and the idea of word, is through the prophets would speak it. And then what would happen is when this word would go forth, then what came out of them was a response or an action. And then the Greek culture would have this word called logos, and it was a spoken word, but it was really centered around reason. And so they're like, oh, this idea of the big word, it's about response, it's about reason, but there's also this idea of alignment and a rhythm to your life. And it's like, oh, well, then it seems like this is really significant. And John's like, it is. And you guys have been talking about it for so long, but I'm telling you, if you want to find where it really centers on, it is in the person of Jesus. And so when you go to Genesis chapter 1 and you begin to see the chaos and disorder, God spoke a word into existence. He said, let there be what? And who's the light, John says? Jesus. And so he's attaching something to this incredibly large story because it's the light that brings order and life and creation begins. And John keeps working through. He says, in the origin of everything is connected to who? Jesus. The reordering and recreation of the cosmos now comes through who? Keep it up, y'all. Light coming into darkness is who? Jesus. The reason and rationality comes through who? Jesus. The fullness of the Torah is through who? Jesus. You want to find answers to the world around you, you find it through who? Jesus. That's a pretty big deal. It's a really big deal. And John's like, no, you center everything on Jesus. It's like, yeah, but we find truth in science. It's like, yeah, we find some truth in science, but science is like not going to tell us the fullness of truth. It might tell us how something works, but it doesn't say why. And it's like, okay, well, it's like you can still find truth, but all of truth, what John ends up saying is like all of truth is Jesus' truth. And then you start having all of these other cultural things that are at play. You have things like legalism. And so you might say like, oh, well, then if this whole thing is Jesus, I'm going to follow the rules exactly how I'm supposed to follow the rules, and then I get Jesus, and everyone else around me will love Jesus because it's about rule following. Does that work for anybody? Well, yeah, because you take out love and you take out grace in the midst of it. And it's like, that doesn't actually lead us to truth. It actually leads us to oppress people around us and be judgmental. So it's like, all right, legalism doesn't necessarily work, though there is this idea of morality, and morality is a part of it, but then we have like moral relativism, which is this idea of like, oh, hey, your truth is your truth, but my truth is my truth. That doesn't work. It doesn't. And we've all seen this in different societies. It's like, sometimes women are severely like oppressed in different societies at different times. Not sometimes, all the times that's happened to women. And even right now in our world, right now there's like some things that like women can't do in certain other countries. Like there's some countries where women can't drive because they're not capable of driving. And it's like, is that a moral truth, women? No. I was like, dear Lord, women. It's like, that's not a moral truth, but it is there, so is that true? Well, no, it's not true. And it's like, well then, why do they have this truth? So you can't have like a relative truth. You need something that like centers on the truth and brings us back. And it's why all these discussions get so chaotic so quickly. It's right now there's the kind of the political discussion with Christians right now. And why is it so chaotic? Because primarily it's never about Jesus. It's primarily about power, and not the power not power in Jesus' name, about power of being able to do things in our country. Primarily. And so we see that that's why he spins out of control so quickly. Even you think in the Christian world, it's fascinating to watch how we have the fruit of the Spirit. And that's in Galatians chapter 5, and that's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. And I forgot goodness in there too. But gentleness is an interesting one in the fruit of the Spirit. It's like Christians have somehow forgotten or have had a moral relativism with gentleness. It's like, how is that described as the evidence of the fruit of the Spirit, and yet now it's like, we can't be gentle, we've got to fight. And it's like, well, hold on a second. I thought fruit of the Spirit, one of them is gentleness. And shouldn't we be modeling that as Christians? And repeatedly throughout Scripture, it talks about it. 1 Timothy 3, a qualification for leadership is actually is gentleness. 1 Peter 3, the response to non-believers, non-Christians, is supposed to be gentleness. James chapter 3 talks about gentleness. That's what actually allows us to be open to truth and open to reason. So this idea of gentleness is it's pivotal. But what I want you to see is so quickly, it's not just non-Christians that have moral relativism. It's also Christians that do. And what John does is he comes in and he's like, hey, I need you to center everything on Jesus. Not some things, everything. So what does it look like for me to be who I am at work? It's centered on Jesus. Who I am at school, it's centered on who? Yeah. Who I am as a parent, centered on who I am as a friend, who I am as a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, centered on Jesus. And it keeps going back to Jesus because Jesus is the Word. In verse 14, he says that the Word became flesh. And this is crazy. This would have jumped off the page that the Word became flesh, that your body matters. This guy, Sam Alberry, he used this quote. He said, and it's one of my favorite quotes about our body. I think I actually used it in our body series, but he said this: Jesus' incarnation is the highest compliment of the human body has ever received. The fact in the incarnation is that Jesus became flesh. It's the highest compliment that your body matters. When we talk about that we should care about our health, is it so that you look good in the mirror? No. And so is it about you getting jacked? No. Is it, when we talk about taking supplements and all these different things, it's not about you can live longer. It's not about any of those things. The reason why you should take care of your body is because Jesus came in the flesh and your body matters. It is a holy and righteous thing to do. It is. And when we don't treat our bodies properly, someone else takes it on. That is not a holy thing to do. And so we start thinking, how I see my body, it's Jesus came in. And so this would have again, to a Greek listener in particular, if they were from the Gnostic belief and said your body doesn't matter. When John wrote this and said the Word became flesh, they would have been what? Maybe we jumped off the page because then guess what? Your body matters. Do you know why we shouldn't go around fighting one another physically? Because the other person's body matters. You know why when we talk about things like abortion and that the life in the womb matters is because the body matters. And so it's where does this language come from? You know the idea of human rights? When we talk about civil rights in our country and when it was centered around race or centered around sex and whatever, you know where that comes from? This. Because prior to John writing this and this idea of the body mattering, human rights weren't a thing. But all of a sudden, when Jesus becomes flesh, it's the basis of the human rights and that someone else's body actually matters, it's off of this reality of the Christian faith. And so we see that, it's a transcendent way to start viewing someone else's body. So think about it this way. If you want to take advantage of someone else's body, is someone else feel free to do so. The reason why that doesn't work is because guess what? There's something holy about our bodies. It's why? Because Jesus came in a body. He made our bodies matter. There's something holy to all of this. And to take advantage of someone else's body is harmful. It's abusive. And it changes the way we start thinking about everything around us. One of the other things that John writes is this idea that Jesus was the Word, and he says that Jesus was also the light. He says that light overwhelms the darkness, and that comes from the creation narrative. And that light is life, light is wisdom, light is presence. Like when you've ever argued with someone or debated with someone and they come to your side, you're like, thank you for coming into what? The light, right? Because you were in darkness before I just convinced you of this. We even use phrases of like an understanding of coming into the light. When you step into feeling like the presence of God, it's like, whoa, your body actually feels light, but it's like something like radiates in you. It's like this light, and it's this idea. The idea of life, right, is coming into light. And so John's saying, if you really want this, you find it in who? There's so much power in that name. In verse 5, John actually writes that the light could not overcome the darkness. And what's fascinating about that part is there's different translations, because some translations talk about the light overcoming the darkness, or the darkness couldn't overcome the light, but some other translations say that the darkness can't understand the light. And when John writes it, he does it purposely, like being ambiguous, because guess what? There are some times that we are in such a state of darkness and we're so lost that we can't even understand the light. We can't even process it. We can't even it's like when you get up in the middle of the night and you think you can see. You know, like you go to the bathroom or you do whatever you got to do, or you're going through this, I can actually see in front of my face. And what happens when the light shines on you? What do? Because guess what? You couldn't see. And so the light feels like, I can't believe what this feels like. And guess what? This is what we feel spiritually. It's like you've gotten so used to the darkness that when the light hits you, it shakes you to the core. And we have a choice of what we do in response to that light. What John actually says is you can reject it if you want. You can reject the light. It's a choice that we have. Or you can accept it. So often conversations about what's transpiring around us are so focused on evil outside of us and not enough about the shadow within us. You know, it's like, oh, look at all the darkness out there. Look at all the evil people. Look at this. Da, da, da. And it's like, ooh, yeah, but what about what's actually transpiring inside of you? How are you letting the light come in there and expose what's actually going on? And so John is setting this out there. And he's like, hey, if you really want to take steps, let the light shine in. Center everything on Jesus. Allow that to transform your life. It's such... He's like, I know people even right now, people are talking about crystals and spirituality and all these different things, and just go find a rock and just go whatever. And some of the stuff of solitude and prayer and meditation is great, right? But some of these other things are grasping for all of these different things. And it's and we can mock it, or we can do whatever, or we can just say this, oh, I see what you're looking for. You're just looking for why we exist and what your purpose is. But let me tell you what John says. John's like, hey, you want to find that? It's in who? Now, the person might say, well, hold on. There's a lot of discussions that come off of that. But it's man, no. John's let me speak into every single cultural context that's happening. And it's let me bring it back to Jesus. This is why we talk about when we get into different opinions about different, whatever this cultural matter is. It's there's no part of having this debate about a cultural issue like sexuality or politics or whatever, war and violence. There's no point even having the debate if we're not going to start with, hey, let's center all of this on Jesus and then go from there. Because if we don't center on Jesus, chaos results. And so it's let me bring it back to the Word. Let me bring it back to the light. John, in verse 12 and 13, he comes in and he says that we're invited into something. And being invited into something feels so good. When you get an invite to come to a party, you're like, yes, this is awesome. If you were not invited to a party you really wanted to get invited to, it doesn't feel so awesome, does it? So John's like, hey, you're invited into something. And back then in this culture, bloodline was everything. So it wasn't just you had a name. Your name represented something. And within that name, it spoke a lot to who you are as a person, but also like who your family actually is. And so your bloodline and your name really meant something incredibly significant. And what John does, again, this would have been like revolutionary to a first century listener. He comes in and he goes, hey, you're invited into a family. You don't have to do this thing on your own. I know people may have ostracized you for whatever reason. You might have made a decision in your life that people are like, oh, we could never be around you again. But in the family of Jesus, they're like, come on in. Come on in. I know like you might have been hurt, but come on in. You might have hurt someone else, but come on in. You might have made a decision that you thought you could never forgive yourself ever, but come on in. Come on in. I want you to know the grace and the truth and the beauty and the love of Jesus. And we're going to do this together. And guess what? You're going to get into this family with all these other children in the spiritual family, and you're going to look around and you're like, whoa, I can't believe we're brothers and sisters. I can't, like, you're here? That's crazy. The first sermon I ever gave many years ago at another church, I'm standing there, and in the front row was a girl I went to college with who partied in our same kind of grouping. And the whole time I was thinking to myself, why, God? Today is the day that she's here. And but here's what's something that was so beautiful in that moment. As I'm giving the sermon, and I got off the stage, and I don't remember the exact conversation, but I'm paraphrasing here. She's like, it's hard for me to believe you were up there today. But here's what's beautiful about that moment is like, oh no, this is like the spiritual family. And this is what I was talking about last week. We go through this journey together. And it has its ups and downs, and it's kind of, but it's like we're invited into this. And John's like, hey, you're invited. See, we spend so much time telling one another who the bad people are. And John's like trying to get us to understand, like, no, hold on. Like the fullness of grace and truth and love in the context of who Jesus is, we're inviting people into something so beautiful. And it's messy. It's messy. But I want you to get invited into this to experience real life and real truth and real purpose. In the end, here's what John is doing. He's like, I know you're searching. And this is part of like when you take a step back and you look at maybe yourself. You're just looking in the mirror. Or you're looking at friends and family. Or you're taking a look at what's transpiring on social media. And you're watching your friends post certain things. Or you're taking a look maybe at a larger scale. And you're looking at what's happening politically in our country. Or maybe you're like very well versed in global economics and all these other things. Like you take a look at a large scale. You take just a step back and you realize, oh, everyone's actually searching. It's just what it is. Everyone's searching. Like, why am I here? What's my purpose? Like, what's all this about? And John's like, can I just give you the starting point? I want to give you the starting point. But here's the thing. When you engage the starting point, you're going to find yourself like, oh, this is not just the starting point. This is my centering point. So I can see actually why I'm here and where I find life. And John's like, hey, it's in this person of Jesus. Fully God, fully human. In this person of Jesus who died and rose again for you and for me. And you're invited into this story. You can reject it. You can reject it, but I'm telling you, nothing will ever satisfy. Nothing will ever give you this level of purpose. Nothing will ever give you this level of like concentrated fullness of life than following Jesus in a group with a bunch of messy other people trying to figure it out. I mean, take a look around. Like, no one in here is perfect, but these are all your brothers and sisters. And here's what's so cool about it. Like globally right now, like millions and millions and millions and millions of your brothers and sisters are together saying, you know what? I do believe Jesus is the keeper of his word. I do believe in the promises. And I do want to anchor myself to Jesus. Because his word, his light, and this family withstands the test of time and the rhythms of whatever happens in the world around us. Why? Because Jesus is all grace and all truth. And bow your heads. So God, this is a moment where we just have to pause and reflect. So often we want a quick hit and something that will just fix whatever we need in our life. But God, you actually want us to take this in. Am I centering my life on Jesus? Am I actually choosing light over darkness? Am I accepting the invitation to a family? That's what we're left with. And so, God, I just pray over our community that we'll never be perfect. I know that. But man, I really hope we're known for continuing to just center everything on Jesus. All that we do, all that we are, the culture of this community is centered on Jesus. And for those that are here this morning that are struggling with marriage, struggling with friendships, dating, purpose, work, school, we all have a decision to make. Do we want to choose light and Jesus or not? And step into that and start the journey. So God, we thank you for your forgiveness. We thank you for your grace. We thank you for your love. We thank you for your truth. We thank you that you are the Word and the light, and that we're invited into a family. We give this to you in your name we pray. Everyone said, Amen. Love you guys so much. If you want prayer this morning, we'll have prayer on either side of the stage. Otherwise, sign up for discipleship on your way out, and we will see you next week.